Our time has now begun. Open your eyes and see the change in you and me. Now as one, living under the sun. Hear the children sing, the hope their voices bring. One Asean, one vision, one people we can. Ignited, united, a brotherhood of man. One voice, one rhythm, in harmony we sing. Across generations, one family we stand.
A strength unbound, destined to shake the ground. Bonds entwined, blessed be the tie that binds. A point of a light, sowing peace for what is right. Like the brightest star, let the world see who we are. One Asean, one vision, one people we care. Ignited, united, a brotherhood of man. One voice, one rhythm, in harmony we sing. Across generations, one family we stand. One Asean, one vision, oh yeah. Ignited, united, say yeah. One voice, one rhythm, come on, sing. Ooh, one family, one Asean, one vision, oh yeah. Ignited, united, say yeah. One voice, one rhythm, let's sing. One family, one Asean, one vision, oh yeah.
People we can,
Ignited, united, say yeah.
brotherhood of man.
One voice, one rhythm, let's sing.
Harmony we sing. Across generations, one family we
One Asean,
stand.
one vision, oh yeah.
People we can,
Ignited, united, say yeah.
brotherhood of man.
One voice, one rhythm, let's sing.
Harmony we sing. Across generations.
One family we stand.
We are one. Our time has now begun. Open your eyes and see the change in you and me. Now as one, living under the sun. Hear the children sing, the hope their voices bring. One Asean, one vision, one people we can. Ignited, united, a brotherhood of man. One voice, one rhythm, in harmony we sing. Across generations, one family we stand.
A strength unbound, destined to shake the ground. Bonds entwined, blessed be the tie that binds. A point of a light, sowing peace for what is right. Like the brightest star, let the world see who we are. One Asean, one vision, one people we care. Ignited, united, a brotherhood of man. One voice, one rhythm, in harmony we sing. Across generations, one family we stand.
time has now begun. Open your eyes and see the change in you and me. Now as one, living under the sun. Hear the children sing, the hope their voices bring. One Asean, one vision, one people we can. Ignited, united, a brotherhood of man. One voice, one rhythm, in harmony we sing. Across generations, one family we stand.
A strength unbounded, destined to shake the ground. Bonds entwined, blessed be the tie that binds. A point of a light, sowing peace for what is right. Like the brightest star, let the world see who we are. One ASEAN, one vision, one people we can. Ignited, united, a brotherhood of man. One voice, one rhythm, in harmony we sing. Across generations, one family we stand. One ASEAN, one vision, oh yeah. Ignited, united, say yeah. One voice, one rhythm, come on, sing. Ooh. One family, one ASEAN, one vision, oh yeah. Ignited, united, say yeah. One voice, one rhythm, let's sing. One family, one ASEAN, one vision, oh yeah.
People we can,
Ignited, united, say
a
yeah.
brotherhood of man.
One voice, one rhythm, let's sing.
Harmony we sing, across generations, one family we
One ASEAN, one vision, oh yeah.
people we can,
Ignited, united, say yeah.
brotherhood of man.
One voice, one rhythm, let's sing.
Harmony we sing, across generations.
One family we stand.
We are one. Our time has now begun. Open your eyes and see the change in you and me. Now as one, living under the sun. Hear the children sing, the hope their voices bring. One ASEAN, one vision, one people we can. Ignited, united, a brotherhood of man. One voice, one rhythm, in harmony we sing. Across generations, one family we stand.
A strength unbounded, destined to shake the ground. Bonds entwined, blessed be the tie that binds. A point of a light, sowing peace for what is right. Like the brightest star, let the world see who we are. One ASEAN, one vision, one people we can. Ignited, united, a brotherhood of man. One voice, one rhythm, in harmony we sing. Across generations, one family we stand.
time has now begun. Open your eyes and see the change in you and me. Now as one, living under the sun. Hear the children sing, the hope their voices bring. One Asean, one vision, one people we can. Ignited, united, a brotherhood of man. One voice, one rhythm, in harmony we sing. Across generations, one family we stand.
A strength unbounded, destined to shake the ground. Bonds entwined, blessed be the tie that binds. A point of a light, sowing peace for what is right. Like the brightest star, let the world see who we are. One Asean, one vision, one people we care. Ignited, united, a brotherhood of man. One voice, one rhythm, in harmony we sing. Across generations, one family we stand. One Asean, one vision, oh yeah. Ignited, united, say yeah. One voice, one rhythm, come on, sing. Ooh, one family, one Asean, one vision, oh yeah. Ignited, united, say yeah. One voice, one rhythm, let's sing. One family, one Asean, one vision, oh yeah.
People we can,
Ignited, united, say yeah.
brotherhood of man.
One voice, one rhythm, let's sing.
Harmony we sing. Across generations, one family we
One
stand.
Asean, one vision, oh yeah.
People we can,
Ignited, united, say yeah.
brotherhood of man.
One voice, one rhythm, let's sing.
Harmony we sing. Across generations.
One family we stand.
We are one. Our time has now begun. Open your eyes and see the change in you and me. Now as one, living under the sun. Hear the children sing, the hope their voices bring. One Asean, one vision, one people we can. Ignited, united, a brotherhood of man. One voice, one rhythm, in harmony we sing. Across generations, one family we stand.
A strength unbounded, destined to shake the ground. Bonds entwined, blessed be the tie that binds. A point of a light, sowing peace for what is right. Like the brightest star, let the world see who
Sawadee krap. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and our viewers online, welcome to the webinar and Facebook Live titled Decade of Action, The Way Forward for ASEAN and the SDGs, or the Sustainable Development Goals in the New Normal, organized by the ASEAN Center for Sustainable Development Studies and Dialogue, or ACSDSD, in order to share knowledge and experience for the ASEAN organizations in regards to SDGs, which was adopted by more than 150 world leaders at the United Nations Sustainable Development Summit in New York in 2015. My name is Varin Sachadeo. Very honored to be your MC and moderator for this session. We are currently in the year 2020, which means 10 years are left to take the 2030 agenda forward. This so-called decade of action will require further and closer collaboration between all stakeholders to share experiences and best practices and translate policies into practices to localize the SDGs at all levels, beginning with the challenges from COVID-19. During the whole session, our VIP participants and Facebook viewers are encouraged to leave questions and comments, and our organizer will then compile answers and responses and consolidate them into a thank you card delivered to all participants and viewers. We have a great lineup this afternoon, but first and foremost, Associate Professor Duongporn Apasin, Dean of the College of Management, Mahidol University, will deliver the welcome address.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, a pleasant good afternoon and Sawadee ka. Let me extend a warm welcome to speakers, our VIP participants, and those who join us on the Facebook Live to the webinar on Decade of Action, The Way Forward for ASEAN and the SDGs in the New Normal, organized by the Asean Center for Sustainable Development Studies and Dialogue, or ACSDSD, the College of Management, Mahidol University, Thailand. I believe that many students, lecturers, and the public are also joining us on our Facebook Live right now. Sustainable development is a global concern to keep us all well in a safe planet. The United Nations General Assembly endorsed the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development to serve as a framework for countries in devising the national policies that balance between economic growth and social and environmental development. Thailand has been actively promoting the global agenda in all sectors, including higher education. The Ministry of Higher Education, Science and Innovation itself has sustainability as a core strategic policy. Mahidol University was founded in 1943 with an organizational value of promoting health, science, art, and innovation with integrity for the betterment of Thai society and the benefit of mankind. The value is translated into the university strategies and policies, of which one goal is to promote global innovation and research and policy advocacy. We also participate in the annual impact rankings of the Times Higher Education on assessing universities against the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. In addition, Mahidol Universities has driven the Eco-University policy for sustainable development on campus and in the surrounding community. The university is committed to creating a balance of economic, social, and environmental considerations in whatever we do. This is reflected in the efficient use of resources, social equality, and improved quality of work life of staff, students, and the surrounding community. The College of Management itself is the first in Thailand to launch in February 2018 an international PhD program on sustainable leadership, which is pioneered by the Center for Research and Sustainable Leadership. Our commitment to sustainable development proceeds further with the establishment of ACSDSD that aspire to be the center of excellence for research in sustainable development and a vital platform for cooperation. We appreciate the close collaboration with the Department of Asian Affairs, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Kingdom of Thailand, and which ACSD a success. Lastly, I hope that this webinar will benefit all of you in your endeavor in advancing partnership for sustainable development in ASEAN and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you, Ajahn Dongporn, for your welcome address. Now, Kun Orawan Yafa, who is the Executive Director for ASEAN Center for Sustainable Development, Studies and Dialogue, or ACSDSD, will give us an introduction to the seminar.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, the United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development has been adopted for 5 years, since September 2015, by more than 150 world leaders at the United Nations Sustainable Development Summit in New York. 10 years are left to take the 2030 Agenda forward. Yet, we are facing major challenges posed by COVID-19 that could undermine our development progress and future achievements. The decade of action, therefore, requires further and closer collaboration between all stakeholders to accelerate SDG implementation, including through sharing of experiences and best practices on how to translate policy into practices and localize the SDGs at all levels. In 2015, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations also adopted the ASEAN Community Vision 2025 to sustain the momentum of regional integration and further contribute to strengthening the ASEAN community building efforts. To realize both the 2030 Agenda and the ASEAN Community Vision 2025, ASEAN has conceptualized the Complementarity Initiative to promote the complementarity between these twin goals. This regional initiative continues to advance based on close partnerships among ASEAN member states and between ASEAN and its external partners, including UN agencies. One of the flagship initiatives under this cooperation framework is the establishment of the ASEAN Center for Sustainable Development Studies and Dialogue, or ACSDSD, which was launched by the ASEAN leaders at the 35th ASEAN Summit in Bangkok, Thailand on November 3, 2019. The center aims to translate ASEAN's commitment to promoting sustainable development cooperation into action, particularly by supporting the implementation of Complementarity Roadmap, as well as enhancing dialogue with interested external partners and various sectors in the society. In this connection, ACSDSD is organizing this webinar to be a starting point for closer collaboration within and outside ASEAN, so that we look to the decade of action together. I appreciate the support from our speakers today, as well as the very constructive support from our development partners so far. I would also like to take this opportunity to introduce our website, acsdsd.org, along with our YouTube, ACSDSD channel, and Facebook at AC2SD Mahidol, so that you can find update information and activities about us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kun Orawan, the Executive Director of ASEAN, of ACSDSD, for the comprehensive introduction. Our next speaker is His Excellency Mr. Mr. Kung Pok, Deputy Secretary General of ASEAN for ASEAN Socio-Cultural Community, who will be speaking live from Jakarta. as we look to the future on how ASEAN could collaborate in advancing the SDGs in the Decade of Action.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sarin. And good afternoon to all colleagues, Madam Usana, Mr. Gawe, and Ms. Thongjae, and all the participants. Of course, because of COVID-19, we cannot have this, webinars in person, but at least we still, stay connected and, create all the opportunity that we can discuss, about all of these important issues. There's no doubt that the COVID-19 has impacted our regions in many fundamental ways. Actually, we are not stranger to pandemic. We used to experience, many of this crisis in the past. What is different this time is the magnitude of the crisis, and that it hits us on almost all fronts at once. According to the World Bank, if the world economy is contract by 5%, around 70 million people will fall under extreme poverty. But if the outbreak, continues to surge and the quality of healthcare system is not there, then the contraction could be even higher, and the numbers of people who live in extreme poverty will be even more. Of course, some sectors will be impacted more than others, and at least, in the ASEAN region, more than 150 million people work in the most affected sector, for example, hospitalities, travels, and so on. ASEAN member states have been very forceful in responding to COVID-19. When we first received the notifications of abnormal pneumonia case from our colleagues, from China, it took the member state around 17 days to declare some sort of, social restrictions and lockdown. Even with all of these measures, we can still see, the impact, and especially, the impacts on the most vulnerable population in our regions. The impacts do not just come from the COVID-19 itself, but also, from our containment measures as well. Some of our solutions, for example, working from home measure, it create, some uneven impact on different segments of the population. And one thing is very clear that, the pandemic is further exacerbating the problems of inequalities in the regions. We've been trying, very hard in improving the livelihood of the people, protecting the environments, and you can see that many of those achievements are closely related to the SDG. But the problems that we are encountering now, and also, the challenges that we have encountered even before the pandemic, some of the goals, of the SDG are still, not up to the level we want. Mr. Gawe will provide more details, information on this. But at least, from what we can see is, 15 out of 17 goals are still lagging behind, and the challenges ahead of us are very, very big. Perhaps I should start by talking a little bit, about some of the policy interventions and commitment from our leaders in responding to COVID as a particular area, but also, the commitment to further advance the Sustainable Development Goals. During the special summit in April, there was a declarations, and in the declarations it states very clearly, on the needs to work together to protect the people, to improve the well-being of people, and also to make sure that no one is going to be left behind. Of course, actualizing the declaration is some things that we are now trying to do. For example, we are now working on the comprehensive recovery plan, and in the comprehensive recovery plan, you can see, 5 major areas which look at the health of the people, the security of the people, the intra-ASEAN trade, economic integrations, and inclusive digitalizations, and so on. And all of this are also, aiming to address the implementations of the SDGs as well. And now we are trying to come up with more concrete, initiative on how we are going to address all of those issues. In addition to the declarations of our leaders and also the recovery framework, the relevant sectoral bodies are also taking steps, to address the COVID-19 and also to protect all the gains that we have achieved, over the past decades. For example, our ASEAN labor ministers, our ministers on social welfare and development, and also our ministers on rural development and poverty eradications. They are, showing the commitments and also putting in place measures that would help our people during these hard times. And another, set of initiatives that are not just looking at the problems of COVID-19, but how we can build back better, not just in terms of recovering from the pandemic and start grow the economy again, but how we can do it in a sustainable way, in an inclusive way, because now we have the opportunities. Of course, the pandemic creates so many challenges for us, but at the same time, we can also look at it as an opportunity for us to do some things that is not done in the past. And I know that there's a question: what's the biggest lesson that we can learn from all of this? I think that would be making sure that our recovery plan, we also have the components of the Sustainable Development Goals, and we allocate enough budget to implement them. It's not just about producing the document, but also making sure that we have the resources to do all of them. We are now working on the online portals that would allow all the experts, to share views and so on how we can, address the problems of COVID-19, but also how we are going to reopen our economy in a safe manner and in a sustainable manner. And also, looking at the possibility of establishing the ASEAN, Center for Public Health Emergencies, so that we can be ready for the next pandemic. This pandemic is not going to be the last one. We are expecting more in the future, and what we can do is to build our resilience and to be ready, to take these challenges up front. We are also working closely with our partners, in creating various platforms that allow all experts, coming from different fields. Because as I mentioned, the COVID-19 is not just the health crisis, but it is also an economic crisis, a social crisis, and it's even a security crisis. So we need a comprehensive plan so that we can get out of these problems in a ways that would allow us, to build a more resilient communities and so on. A numbers of initiatives that I would like to also share, and all of these initiatives are very closely related to the implementations and the advancement of the Sustainable Development Goal. We are, organizing a regular planning agencies meetings now, and these are the people who are working on, the integration of the Sustainable Development Goals into the national policies. Of course, we don't have, the national SDG kind of plan, but, if we look at the national development plans of all the member states, we can see a lot of components of the SDGs in there. And by working closely with them, we can make sure that, when we are implementing the SDG, it's going to be done in a more comprehensive and strategic manner. We are working with partners, for example, China's and the UNDP in organizing the annual symposium and looking at different aspects of the SDG. We're looking at the financing part, we're looking at the localizing part, and the recommendation from the symposium have been also shared with the member states. So where applicable, they will also use some of the recommendation as part of the national development plans as well. We are working with our EU partners, on some form of dialogue so that experts from the ASEAN member state and also from the EU can talk about, sustainable development goal. We are working very closely with our UN colleagues as well, and ESCAP is one of our strong partners. We're working on a range of issues, and recently we are working together on the declarations on combating drought, and hopefully, we get this declaration adopted by the leaders, and then we can come up with a regional plan of actions so that we can make sure it's not just a declaration, but some concrete activities that we can do to address the problems of drought. Now, along with the many platforms that I just mentioned, we are also investing a lot in knowledge products as well. We are, hoping that the ASEAN Development Outlook will be released sometimes at the end of this year, and that will also, highlights both the achievements and all the challenges that we face, especially, looking from the inclusive perspective, looking from the sustainable development perspective. And this document, aims to provide some sort of, baseline understanding of how much we have achieved so far as well. But at the same time, be bold in terms of how we are going to do more to make sure that, the SDG will be advanced as quickly and as comprehensively as possible. Of course, now we are in the midst of COVID-19, although we are talking about, post-pandemic plan and so on. But it's very difficult for us, to kind of say, when would be the end of the pandemic. What is going to happen for sure is we are going to be in this situation for quite a long time. We can see, the experience of all of the member states. There's been no cases for numbers of months, but then suddenly there are new cases, and then put the whole countries back in lockdown and so on. So it's very difficult for us to say that now we are out of the pandemic or when is going to be the end of it. So we are now working on the socio-economic impacts of COVID-19, and we are hopefully, getting some things out of this impact study, and then, how we can shape the directions of our policies for the next 5 years. Actually, this year is a critical year for us because all of the sectoral bodies under the ASEAN Social Cultural Communities are working on the new work plan, and we are now, trying to look at it from a different perspective. How can we, making sure that the things that we are doing, we have a greater impact, not just the numbers of activities we want to do, but we also want to make sure that, there's this cascading effects. By doing one activities, we also create impacts on another activities. And SDGs are closely, related to this document. Actually, a numbers of our work plans have been, depending heavily on the SDGs and other, major documents that are looking at, the implementation of the SDG. Of course, the Complementarity Roadmap is one of the most important documents here, and I really, appreciate all the efforts, especially, the Thai government for putting a lot of effort and resources in doing this, and to make sure that the SDG, at least, some components of the SDGs align very well with the Asean Vision 2025. And it's not just the vision itself, but also, all of our work plans and blueprints. We are now talking about, making just one blueprint, and I hope that that would be, a kind of a fresh look at how we are going to do all of this. And of course, aligning the two important documents are one of the priorities that we are going to do when it comes to working on the next plan, for ASEAN. On the issues of collaborations, there's a few areas that I would like to share, and hopefully, this is some things that we are going to do for the next 5 years. The first one is the budget issues. Of course, it's always problems then, when the members of the United Nations adopted the SDGs, the issues of budget is always there, and making sure that we have enough resources to implement all of the goals and activities is of utmost importance. And the same for us, for all the work plans that we have, the blueprint, the visions. We're working very closely with our dialogue partner, development partners, and I have to say is that they are very supportive. There are so many activities and programs that are supported by our dialogue partner, development partners. One thing that I would like to highlight here, regarding the budget issues. Of course, now we are in the midst of the pandemic. A lot of countries are affected by it. The economy is slowing, so the availability of resources is in a big question mark now. Of course, the governments of all the countries would allocate as much resources as possible to tackle the COVID-19 pandemic, and there will be shortages in terms of resources to advance other areas of SDG or our visions and blueprint and work plan. But I, would like to highlight that it's also important for us to not lose sight of, the things that is very important to our sustainability, to our resilience, and also, being as a inclusive community. For example, when it comes to the areas of training, skills, education, healthcare, environment, and many others, they are also very important. And of course, cognizant of the lack of resources, what we should do is, to make sure that when we are allocating the budgets and using the budget, we will do it in a strategic manners, in a more targeted manners. And of course, the partners, dialogue partner, development partner, and international organizations can be very supportive in assisting us in doing all of this. The budget question is not just at the national level, but also at the regional levels as well. So I think we need to work together to make resources available so that we can use to advance our goals, and not just the SDG, but also our work plans, our blueprint, because they are intertwined. So by creating a positive impacts on the areas that we are now working on, we also contribute greatly to the implementation of the SDGs as well. Another things that we are going to work very closely with our partners is the scientific knowledge sharings. This is some things that we've been doing quite some times now, and also with our UN partner, including UNESCO, how we can make use of technological advances, innovations, and so on, and making sure that it serves not just the business purpose, but also contribute to poverty reductions, to the improvement of the livelihood of our people, to the sustainabilities of our environment, and all of this we can work with our partners. Actually, there's a number of activities that we've been doing together already, and some of the innovative ideas, some of the technological solutions that are available in our partners countries. They also shares, they also experiments in some of the member state, and I hope this endeavor can be further expanded so that our people, more of our people, can benefit from it. The third areas that I would like to also highlight is our CANU efforts in enhancing our statistical capacity. This is very important. We've been working with partner very closely as well, the EU, the +3, and our UN colleagues. One of the challenges when it comes to implementing the SDG is to make sure that we can know what we have achieved. There's always problems there. Of course, there are so many indicators that are coming with the SDG, but then, as I mentioned, that some of the goals and activities have been translated into the national policies, so they need a different sets of indicators to allow them to know how much they progress, what are the areas they need to do most, and what would be the impact, and so on. And the initiative to have the planning agencies to meet every year, one of the goal is to allow them to discuss and come up with a framework that would allow them to better monitor the progress and the implementations of the SDG. We also receive a lot of support from our partners in this regard, not just the financial resources, but also technical support as well. And I hope we can further strengthen our partnership in these areas as well, so that we can put in place a strong monitoring and evaluation framework that would allow the member state to know how much we progress. I have to say that this is one of the big areas that we have. Looking at the work plans, looking at the many activities that we are doing. Of course, some have a very robust M&E framework, and that allow the member state to assess the progress and to understand the impact of the activities they're doing. But for some other activities and work plans, we don't have that robust systems in place. So sometimes that stop us from doing things in a more strategic manner. And we have to be more strategic given the scarcity, given the challenges posed to us by COVID-19. The fourth areas that I like to also raise as well, and this is some things that we have many potential areas to work with our partner, and we've been doing a lot already. It is the investment in the most needed sector, for example, infrastructure, renewable energies, and now is even more urgent than ever, which is the investment in digital connectivity. Hundreds of millions of our children and youth cannot go to school because of the lockdown, because of the social restrictions. Many schools have been closed, and only 53% of our population have access to internet. And when we are talking about this 53%, not all of them have the facilities, have the means, to make use of these digital platforms. And we can see, only a small fraction of our population can benefit from digital learning, remote learning, and so on. So this is one of the challenges, when the World Economic Forum conducted a surveys among our young people, and they, often raise this as one of the major challenges. Of course, when it comes to certain investment, it's going to be a big one. So the governments alone cannot do all of this. So we need to work with regional groupings, with the dialogue partner, development partner, to make sure that we have enough resources to invest in all of this. It's not just about making sure that all of our people can benefit from what we are doing, but also build an ASEAN region into a more resilient, into a more stronger communities. The 6 areas that I would like to share here is the current efforts by the ASEAN Secretariat and also the ASEAN member state in bridging the gaps, or in a ways in working, creating an enabling environment. So our colleague from the university, from think tanks, not just within the region but also from outside the regions as well. We are planning actually this year to organize the ASEAN Think Tank Symposium, to talk about leave no one behind, which is also part of the SDG. But because of COVID-19, we couldn't do it. Last year we did it once, and we found it very interesting. And there's a lot of information, a lot of ideas that have been shared by our colleague, from the university, from the academic institution. And now, an event that we are now having, it is also organized by, our colleague from the Mahidol universities and the ASEAN Center for Policy Dialogue and Studies as well. So we can see, the benefits of, the contributions of our civil societies and also academic institutions in the policy discourse. And this is some things that we should, further enhance, and create an enabling environment so that all of them can work together. Another partners that we've been, working very closely, it is the private sector. Early this year, actually, we had this symposium on circular economy, which was funded and organized by SCG Thailand. And there's a lot of interesting ideas on how we can address environmental impact, with the new business model, with the new solutions, innovative. I have to say, there's a lot of creative idea coming from our private sector colleagues. So, they have the potential to contribute. And it's not just about some things that are related to economics or producing new product, but some other social responsibilities works, they can also greatly contribute as well, especially in times of hardship like this. The unemployment benefit, the support for our workers, those who work in the informal economy, small and medium enterprises. So there's a potential role for the private sector to contribute to this. And of course, the impacts that they are going to create will, greatly contribute to the advancement of the SDG. My last point, I think what is happening and was happening in the past as well is that, sometimes we often do things in a silo. One sector is focusing on one thing, another sector is focusing on another things. So the big challenge for us going forward is, making sure that we have the synergies, that this coordination, so all relevant stakeholders, can come together and work on the SDGs and also, many other activities that we want to do. It's not just the whole of government approach, but also whole of society approach and whole of ASEAN approach. And our partners, will play a very important role in contributing to our efforts, especially in, our commitments and efforts to make sure that we can, achieve the SDG by 2030. The road ahead it's not easy, but I think we still have an opportunity to do something about it. And now we are talking about a comprehensive, large-scale recovery plan. So the SDGs should be part of that plan, and making sure that we allocate enough resources, to implement them. The new normal should be an inclusive one, a sustainable one, not just make economic sense, but also everyone should benefit from it. I would like to end my interventions here. In case we have more points to discuss, we can do so in the Q&A. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency, Mr. Kung Pok, live from Jakarta. The highlights of the speech by His Excellency are the areas of collaboration that ASEAN stakeholders can work together moving forward, either budget and resources, knowledge sharing, capacity indicators, investment in infrastructure and digital connectivity, and last but not least, the synergies among all stakeholders in incorporating the SDGs into the recovery plan. Now, moving on from policies to action, Kun Usana Piranon, Director General of the ASEAN Affairs Department, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Royal Kingdom of Thailand, will be speaking live from the MFA on promoting Complementarity's initiative in ASEAN.
ขอบคุณค่ะคุณวารินได้ยินชัดเจนนะคะค่ะก็ thank you very much for the introduction, and I would like to thank DSG Kong Pok for joining us this afternoon, and my greetings to Dr. Duongporn, Kun Orawan, Kave from UNSCAP, and Kun Tongchai from ASEAN. Thank you very much for your participation this afternoon. DSG Kong Pok mentioned about the implementation of SDG in ASEAN shortly, and I think Kave will give us more detail on that. But I just want to touch upon the progress made in ASEAN. If I go to the first slide, please. May I have the first slide, please? Next one, please. Next slide, please. Yes, from the slide, you can see that since the SDG has been adopted and ASEAN has put so much efforts in implementing the SDG, some of the goals are advancing than others. For example, Goal 3 on good health and well-being is quite advanced. And another goal is Goal 4, quality education, Goal 9, industry, innovation, infrastructure. All these, the implementation on these 3 goals have helped ASEAN a lot in responding to COVID-19. So what I would like to mention here is that what we are doing now or what we are doing in the past has helped us to be able to respond to emergency in the future. So it is really important in this the start of the decade of action that we are focusing more on the goals that are still lagging behind. And I would like to touch upon the Complementarity Initiative. Kun Arawan from the ACSDSD has already mentioned that in the year 2015, when the UN 2030 agenda was adopted, in that same year, ASEAN has also adopted the Asean Vision 2025. and the share elements, key elements from the UN 2030 Agenda and the Asean Vision 2025 are two key issues. One is to put people first. So we, in ASEAN, we focus on developing an ASEAN-centered, a people-centered ASEAN. The other one is leaving no one behind. So these two key elements are the common objective of the two important documents, the ASEAN Community Vision 2025 and the UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And Thailand has served as the coordinator for ASEAN in advancing sustainable development cooperation within the region since the year 2016. And Kun Arawan has already mentioned that we have organized the high-level brainstorming dialogue on advancing complementarity between the ASEAN Community Vision 2025 and the UN 2030 Agenda. And from the first high-level brainstorming dialogue that we co-hosted with the UNSCAP, we identify 5 key priority areas under the Complementarity Initiative, which are poverty eradication, infrastructure and connectivity, sustainable management of natural resources, sustainable consumption and production, as well as resilience. So these are the 5 priority areas identified in the Complementarity Initiative. And from these 5 priority areas, we have developed it into a roadmap within the ASEAN community, focusing on these 5 key areas, plus capacity building, which is has cut across all 3 priority areas. And if you look at the Complementarities Initiative, and I would like to refer to what DSG Kongpok mentioned, that ASEAN is also in the process of developing a comprehensive recovery framework. The ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework touch upon 5 best strategic key strategies. First is the how to enhance the health system recovery. Second is how to strengthen human security. Third is to minimize the potential of intra-ASEAN market and connectivity. Fourth is to accelerate inclusive digitalization. And 5 is to advance towards a more sustainable and resilient future. If you look at the 5 broad strategy under the ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework, you can see that there are a lot of common elements shared by the Complementarities Initiative under the ASEAN and UN 2030 Agenda and the ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework. For example, issue of digitalization that DSG Kongpok mentioned just now should be one of the key elements in our comprehensive recovery framework as well. Issue like poverty eradication, infrastructure and connectivity, and the sustainable management of natural resources. These are key strategy that ASEAN can do. So if you implement the SDG, if you implement the Complementarity Roadmap, it will in a way reinforce our economic recovery framework as well. So it's not only the complementarity between the 2030 Agenda or the ASEAN 2025 vision, but now we will have another plus, which is to reinforce and to implement the ASEAN comprehensive framework at the same time. So I would like to offer some of the way forward in implementing the Complementarity Initiative. First of all is to mainstream sustainable development in the work of all sectors, because sustainable development cut across all sectoral bodies of ASEAN. So it is cross-cutting in nature. So therefore it is important that all ASEAN bodies understand and recognize the importance of implementing the SDGs as a pathway towards achieving sustainable economic growth, promoting our people's well-being, and protecting the environment. So these are important. So all sectors in the ASEAN community, as the SG Kong Pok mentioned, it needs a whole of the community approach. So all sectors, all sector bodies have to be on board in implementing the SDG. And to this end, I think the ASEAN will has an important role to play in coordinating ASEAN efforts in promoting knowledge and raise awareness on sustainable development within the ASEAN community, linking with other institutions and linking with other bodies that work on SDG within the region. You perhaps can reach out to ASEAN dialogue partners and external partners as well. So this could help turn the policy of implementing SDG into the real action. And second is, I would like to say that Sustainable Development Cooperation under the Complementarity Initiative should be reprioritized to be able to best support the ASEAN recovery from COVID-19. For example, cooperation under the priority area of poverty eradication should now focus more on human security, issues like health security, food security, for example, should be focused and be given priority. In this context, the proposal made by Thailand at the ASEAN Summit in June to establish the ASEAN COVID-19 Response Fund is worth out for serious consideration. And I am pleased that the fund is now up and running. And we hope that our health sector will concretize, utilize this fund to purchase PPEs, test kits, or medicines to better respond to COVID-19. And in addition, as the new normal world is more towards digitalization, greater investment on digital infrastructure, promote digital literacy among our students, our people, and our workforce is really important. And these are some of the issues that identify in both the Complementarity Roadmap and the Comprehensive Recovery Framework of ASEAN. And my last point is that we need to ensure that the Complementarity Roadmap will be implemented effectively, which means that we need to have an effective monitoring and evaluation system. As I mentioned earlier about the ASEAN role in providing institutional support for the coordination of the implementation of the roadmap, the ASEAN should enhance its engagement and network with all relevant sectors and stakeholders within ASEAN. That includes all the ASEAN Center and the external partners. And the ASEAN should continue to work together with ASEAN Secretariat and UNSCAP in particular, especially on information sharing and close coordination to their activities and programs. So I would like to end my intervention by saying that we should use the outbreak, the challenges of COVID-19, and turn it into opportunity to move forward the implementation of SDG within our region and start the decade of action with our real actions toward implementing and attaining the SDG. So I would like to end my intervention here, and I would be pleased to answer further comments to the questions from the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency Kunusana Piranon, who's still with us until the end of the session for the Q&A session as well. And she also repeats the message that we can see the challenges as the opportunities. And she has shared with us the milestone of our achievement of us working together and moving forward. There are still lots of opportunities in many areas that we can attack, and we can actually work on these challenges together. Our next topic is SDGs, progress in ASEAN and the importance of regional and sub-regional cooperation, which will be delivered live from UNESCAP by Mr. Kaveh Zahedi. He's the Deputy Executive Secretary of the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, or the UNESCAP.
Thank you very much, dear moderator, and good afternoon. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to join the session this afternoon, but a very tough act to follow all the distinguished speakers that have gone before me, from the Dean of the College of Management at Mahidol to the Executive Director of the ASEAN Center, ACS BSD, of course, my dear friend, Deputy Secretary General of ASEAN DSG Kwak, and DG Usana. I think they have really set the scene for exactly what I was hoping to cover today, which is just to touch on where we were as ASEAN even before COVID. How was progress in implementing the Sustainable Development Goals before COVID arrived, and then take a little stock of COVID, what it has done, and how, in a way, that there is now an opportunity to move forward in a different way. That was stressed by many of the preceding speakers. The reality is that when COVID emerged earlier this year, the countries of Southeast Asia were already not on track to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And they were lagging behind really in all but one of the 17 SDGs. And you already saw this slide a moment ago. ESCAP's annual Asia-Pacific SDG progress report, which this slide is drawn from, clearly shows this mixed picture of progress even before the impacts of COVID are factored in. I think what this chart essentially shows is that despite strong economic growth, the sub-region had still had high levels of inequality, low levels of social protection, and a large informal sector, as well as, in a way, worrying levels of ecosystem damage, including biodiversity loss, greenhouse gas emissions, and of course, poor air quality. So a mixed picture of progress even before COVID within our region of Southeast Asia. As we look at through the window of the Complementarities Initiative and the priority areas that Kunusana presented to you, actually it's a similar mixed picture of progress within these 5 priority areas. This includes building resilience to socioeconomic vulnerabilities and disasters. It's especially relevant today as the COVID-19 pandemic has in a way exposed the vulnerabilities of many communities and people. So whether you look at it through the window of the SDGs as a whole or through the priorities of the Complementarity Initiative, acceleration was needed to achieve the targets and goals that countries had set themselves. So in a way, going back to the way things were before is not an option. And this takes us now to COVID-19. Of course, the pandemic has exacerbated risks and revealed new challenges. The COVID-19 pandemic and its repercussions are likely to further complicate the region's trajectory towards sustainable development. The region, of course, is experiencing a sharp downturn in economic production. Kung Kwak mentioned a few of the numbers coming from the World Bank. At this moment, nobody has a crystal ball, and all of these projections seem to change from week to week. But what we know is that there's been a major setback in terms of economic progress. And at the same time, the pandemic has clearly laid bare the fragilities and vulnerabilities of many of our communities, the most vulnerable, whether it's the migrants, the older people, or those working in micro, small, and medium enterprises, informal workers, many of whom are not even registered. So how do we chart a pathway to a new normal, given that this is our starting point? Well, of course, first of all, we have to recognize the rapid containment measures that were taken by the countries of Southeast Asia, by many countries, have indeed spared many of those same countries from some of the more devastating impacts of the pandemic. But as DSG Kwok said, this is still in motion. This is not a settled situation. Countries that were being held up as global leaders yesterday suddenly find themselves battling outbreaks today. But we now have a chance, in a way, as we look forward, even in the midst of this pandemic, to seize really what is an unprecedented opportunity. An opportunity to chart a very different, a new pathway towards a new normal that is more inclusive, that is more sustainable, and that is, of course, more resilient. And some of this was laid out by the United Nations Secretary General when he released his policy brief just a few weeks ago, a policy brief on the impact of COVID-19 on Southeast Asia, where he essentially identified 4 entry points for this new pathway. The first one was tackling inequality. The second one, bridging the digital divide. And many people have talked about this in different ways before me today. The third one was ensuring a green and sustainable recovery. And the fourth one, upholding human rights and good governance practices, even amidst the response to COVID. If you would allow me, I'm going to just delve a little bit deeper into some of these entry points and to talk about how our current UN-ASEAN collaboration can, to some degree, contribute to or even help shape this new normal. The first area is tackling inequality. And the pandemic has clearly shown how the most or more vulnerable groups suffer from greater health risks, greater risk of income loss, and worsening housing conditions. And this particularly applies to, say, the 218 million informal workers in our region of Southeast Asia. They represent anywhere between 50 and 90% of non-agricultural workforce across the country, many of whom are working in the micro, small, and medium enterprises. And the long-term solutions for dealing not only with those working in the informal sector and MSMEs, but for tackling inequality across the board is, of course, clear. Number one, increasing social protection and establishing universal healthcare systems. This has to go along with helping the MSMEs, especially those operated by women, to absorb shocks. I think DSG Kwok mentioned it, I think he put it perfectly. He said we have to build the resilience of these communities. That's exactly what tackling inequality would be about. Prior to the pandemic, our analysis suggested that increased public spending on social protection to match just the global average could pull over 300 million people out of moderate poverty and about 50 million people out of extreme poverty by 2030 in the region as a whole. And our joint work on poverty eradication in the Complementarity Initiative will, of course, be crucial as we move towards recovery. And this is where there are complementarities in the multiple agendas that the countries are trying to achieve. We really very much remain committed to share our analysis and expertise to support Southeast Asian governments and their national stakeholders to develop much more inclusive social protection policies and mechanisms that will be the foundation of tackling inequality. The second area is bridging the digital divide. This was identified by the Secretary General as, of course, an area where our region, not just Southeast Asia, but Asia Pacific, has done particularly well, but there are signs that inequalities are widening. During the pandemic, countries in the region quickly rolled out innovative digital responses, ranging from the distant learning to contact tracing, sharing public information, many uses of ICT and technology. But these new solutions have yet to really reach their full potential, partly due to the growing digital divide in our Southeast Asia region. 55% of the population remain offline, and internet access prices are highest in the countries and probably to the people least able to afford it. So in the long term, scaled up regional efforts are needed to sustain the investments in inclusive ICT development, not just ICT, but inclusive ICT, and to develop the legal and regulatory basis for the digital recovery to take root and to bring digitized services to all. Because otherwise, this could be yet another frontier of inequality within Southeast Asia. And of course, the good news is that we have gained certain traction in this work through the Complementary's priority area of promoting infrastructure and connectivity. We've worked from the SCAP side with Cambodia, Laos, PDR, Myanmar, Vietnam, to analyze the possibility of improving broadband connectivity and affordability through common exchange points. This is part of the overall Asia-Pacific Information Superhighway Initiative, whose aim is to bridge the digital divide across countries in our region. The third area that was identified by the United Nations Secretary General was ensuring a green recovery. Even before the pandemic, Southeast Asia was not on track to achieve the climate-related goals of the 2030 agenda, nor the complementary priority area of sustainable consumption and production. At the same time, countries in the region, such as the Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam, are most prone to the impacts of climate change. So the recovery from the pandemic presents really a unique opportunity to accelerate the move away from fossil fuels to low carbon technologies and from brown economies of the past to green industries and infrastructure of the future. And here, the role of the ASEAN Resources Panel, which is one of the flagship initiatives under the UN ASEAN Complementarity Initiative, will of course be crucial. We will be able to turn to the diverse expertise of the panel for advice on sustainable use of resources. At the same time, the platform will help national and regional cooperation on really decoupling growth from environmental degradation. So, working together, these are some of the areas that, of course, are going to be highest on our agendas as we look forward to our future collaboration within ASEAN and within the Complementarities Initiative. At the moment, the ASEAN UN Plan of Action has been the framework to implement many of the relevant initiatives in the Complementarities Roadmap. Now, the Plan of Action 2016-2020 will, of course, conclude this year. And the new plan for 2021-2025 is under development right now and is going to be submitted to the leaders. And this new plan really provides us with the golden opportunity to lock in many of the short-term investments that have happened to address inequality, to address the digital divide, to address the greening of recovery that many of the previous speakers mentioned. For us, the new plan, in a way, also has a shift in some of the emerging issues that need to be addressed. For example, climate action needs to be scaled up, and that will be reflected in the evolving plan of action. Gender equality, cyber security, some of the new frontiers will be a part of our future UN ASEAN plan of action. These are critical parts of the vision for long-term recovery from COVID-19 in the region, and I hope part of the ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework as that evolves. So, in summary, and I will finish here, even before COVID-19, ASEAN member countries really recognized a need to accelerate across the board to successfully reach the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030, and at the same time achieve their vision that they had set out for themselves for 2025. But the current pandemic should not and does not mean suspending the implementation and the acceleration of the SDGs. Quite the opposite. The SDGs could be the mechanism for response to COVID COVID-19. Southeast Asia, after all, is where we have seen the strongest momentum in containing the virus and protecting of our people. These experiences early in the pandemic are going to be really a very important asset in building the new normal. Allow me to finish, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, with a quote from the United Nations Secretary General on the occasion of the launch of his policy brief for Southeast Asia that I mentioned during this presentation. And I quote, he said, "The region has much work to do, but has formidable capacities at its disposal. The United Nations is strongly committed to our partnership with the countries of Southeast Asia, and we will continue to support efforts to get the region on track to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and build a peaceful future for all." End quote. With that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, and I turn back to our esteemed moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Zahedi, who is still with us until the end of the session for some questions which we'll be taking from participants and also from our online viewers. We've been hearing the views from the public sector for the whole session since the very beginning. Now we also need to look at the perspective from the business sector, which is equally important to realize the achievement of the SDGs or the Sustainable Development Goals. So our last topic for this afternoon is the perspective from business sector on how business can help to expedite the SDGs, which we'll be hearing from Kun Tongchai Thanachanan, Managing Director at Asean.
Thank you, Khun Varin. Although the UN SDGs are actually national and global goals, it is undeniable that the business sector is crucial for the success and achievement of these goals, because business sector is the largest consumer of the world's resources. It is also where jobs are created and solutions to everyday life's challenges are created. So while the public sector can be the leader in improving education, sanitation, peace and justice, other goals like clean energy or responsible consumption and production truly require changes in the business operations. Just this morning, before coming here, I had a pleasure to attend an important event at the UN office where more than 50 Thai business organizations gathered to affirm their commitment to sustainable development as part of the UN Global Compact Network members. Together, these 50 organizations account for more than 4.2 trillion baht, or about $140 billion in annual revenue. Additionally, in a few weeks' time, Asean will also be hosting Thailand Sustainability Expo, where we will communicate with the consumers to actually change their behaviors to become more sustainable. So I might say that the awareness and the commitment to sustainable development is alive and well in Thailand and also in ASEAN. As this year we are coming to the 2020, or it will be the last 10 years where it will be our last chance to reach UN Sustainable Development Ambition, which is set for 2030. As such, the UN has named this decade to be a decade of actions. So it's only appropriate to see where actions do happen in this region. So the first indicator, slide ka. Oops. The first indicator from the business sector's point of view is the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, which was launched in 1999, or about 20 years ago. And although there are some criticism about this index, it is nevertheless one of the very few global indices that indicates how businesses are actually promoting sustainable development in their operations. And it's the index that specifically focuses on the business sector. Here from this graph, you will see that there are about 60 world industry leaders in the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. And here we can see that Asia is quite well represented in this leadership, with 18 companies representing Asia and being recognized as the best in the global industry. And that accounts for 30% of the global leadership. If you look further, within ASEAN, Thai companies actually lead among the industry leaders, with 8 Thai companies ranked as the global industry leaders. Among these are Thai Beverage, CP All, PTT Global Chemical, PTTEP, Thai Oil, Banpu, Thai Union, and True Corporation. You could see that all these 8 companies represent multiple industries across Thailand. However, we can see that from Asia and ASEAN in particular, we can do better. If we compare these 18 industry leaders to the 28 from European countries, we can see that the variety of the countries which reside the industry leaders are much more varied in Europe. So there is still a long way to go for ASEAN companies. And you may be thinking that this is all about large corporations. How about for medium and small enterprises? What can they do in sustainable development? And I would say that perhaps a framework of 3 steps pathway could be a good one. First, do no harm. It may sound simple. Do no harm could be about just being legal and obliging to regulations, but in fact, it's not that simple. Because in this world where the supply chain is thoroughly globalized, the standards and regulations are increasingly demanding. I remember hearing from a sugar company that provides raw material to a global drink company. Just by supplying the sugar to the drink company, they have to respect all the audits and the standards that the US companies are obliged to. Similarly, we have seen many different examples in Thailand where the supply chain of the fishermen in the sea somewhere that is very far from the global company can actually harm the global company that supply tuna fish, for example. So do no harm actually applies across all the value chain to the smallest supplier in the global value chain. So that is the first step about sustainable development. But businesses can do better, because once we actually recognize and follow the regulations, be it environmental regulations, workplace human rights protection, or corporate governance, we can even do better by doing goods ourselves. And here we have a lot of examples across the world. The UK is one of the best examples about social and environmental sourcing. And here in Asia and in ASEAN, we see a lot of that already, where the procurement department of the businesses actually don't only secure the raw materials that are cheapest, but also the raw material producers that respect the social and environmental conditions. Beyond sourcing, businesses can actually invest in many, many things. For example, clean energy to help clean up the environment, or efficient logistics systems so that the efficiency of energy usage can be improved. And particularly, businesses can engage with the stakeholders close to their operations, close to their factories, for example. And we see a lot of this happening already in ASEAN and in Thailand. Perhaps the most important part is the third step, where businesses can actually go out beyond themselves to promote the goods by providing platforms, be it platforms that are co-partnership with the public sector, or be it the platform to help the smaller businesses, or the platforms that are topic-driven. And I could speak about Thailand, where we see hundreds of these platforms being promoted. For example, one of the very well-known one from the last government is called the Pracharat Platform, where unfortunately it became the name of the political party, but originally it was actually a platform for the public and private sectors to actually partner up to solve the social and environmental issues. And a lot of these platforms are still going on, be it in education or community development. The second part, we also see a lot of examples happening here in Thailand. For example, the Space F is the platform where the NIA, or National Innovation Agency, works with Mahidol University, as well as Thai Union and Thai Beverage, to promote incubator in food innovation. We also see Banpu, one of the global leader in the coal industry, having an incubator for the social enterprises. And lastly, a lot of businesses actually gather together to promote the cause of social development goals. A well-known one that is recently launched is the Thailand Responsible Business Network. So you can see that be a big corporation or a small enterprise, we can all contribute to the sustainable development. Looking forward, I'm very happy to see that the sustainable development is not rested on the good intention of the business alone, but there are actually tools and mechanisms to make these permanent practices. And two of these examples that I would like to raise here today are about financing and about mechanism for social enterprise. The first part is about finance. It's undeniable that finance is very important for the business sector. It's like a lifeline, it's like a bloodstream to the business. So it's very important that the financial world recognizes the the sustainability and sustainable development. Here in the graph, you can see that from some statistics from GSI Alliance, the amount of sustainable investment actually accumulate to about $30 trillion. And most of that are in Europe and the US. So we can also do better here in Asia as well. Beyond this private investment, we have seen in 2017 the getting together of sovereign wealth funds, about 6 funds altogether, to promote One Planet sovereign wealth funds. And also we have seen 97 stock exchanges coming together as sustainable stock exchange network. So we can see that the financial world recognizes the importance of the sustainable development. But that's not enough. We have talked about the large corporates and as well as financial world, but the small businesses and entrepreneurs have also gathered momentum in the sustainable development area. As we can see in the bottom of the slide about the social enterprises or the entrepreneurs who actually seek the way of businesses to solve the environmental and social issues. We've seen that this social enterprise sector is one of the largest and most and fastest growing sector in the world. It is estimated by the British Council that there are more than 2.5 million social enterprises in South Asia, and there are more than 400,000 enterprises, social enterprises in Southeast Asia, About 300,000 of those are in Indonesia. These social enterprises account for about 3% or up to even 20% of GDP in some of the European countries. And they actually propose a lot of innovative business models, as well as being much more inclusive in their leadership and employment. They are at the forefront of social solution and environmental solution, including during the COVID time. So, in my personal view, I think that only when social and environmental impacts get included into the business equation is when sustainable development can become a new norm. And this is when the sustainable development would not only rely on the good intentions and the regulations alone. Thank you.
And that is the perspective from the business sector. We thank you, Kun Tongchai Thanachanan, the Managing Director at ASEAN, for the perspective and a quick reminder of the 3 steps approach to SDGs: do no harm, do good, and promote good. And there are still lots that can be done by the business sector when they incorporate the social and the environmental impact into the business plans. Now we have some time for the Q&A. And we've been asking our participants through Zoom and also from Facebook Live to send in the questions and comments, and we'll be taking them and we'll be compiling them, and we'll be answering and responding to all those comments and questions in the thank you card, which will be delivered to all the participants as well. Now we have some time for the Q&A, so let's begin with the question for His Excellency Mr. Kung Pok, who's the Deputy Secretary General of the ASEAN for ASEAN Socio-Cultural Community. So the question is dealing with youth. How do you think youth, ASEAN youth in particular, can contribute to advancing the SDGs, and what kind of support from the government and the society they would need to make it happen?
Thank you very much for the questions. Actually, as you know, our youth has become the centers of our policies for many areas. And when it comes to COVID-19, when we're talking about the recovery plan and also, our response plans, we are also looking at what kind of roles that youth can play. Of course, they are going to be the driver of our economies in the future. So from the skills and labors and education sides, they have a very prominent role to play over there, and there's a lot of policies that have been put in place to make sure that our youth will obtain not just hard skills but also soft skills that will allow them to adapt, to change quickly, and to learn quickly so that they can thrive in new forms of economies. Actually, the prominent role of youth have been always highlighted even before the COVID-19. But now with the COVID-19, we can even see clearly that they can also involve actively in the response process. They are probably the one of the most impacted segment of the populations as well. Talking from the obtaining education perspective, but also the prospect for employment and so on. We have a clear work plan to support the youth, and probably some of our colleagues have heard of the Youth Development Index, and we look at numbers of key areas on how we can further support our youth in contributing to not just economic development but also other social problems and community building efforts as well. The roles of youth even highlighted at the highest level. We have the declarations on the youth involvement in climate actions, youth in disaster management. So we can see the potentials and how they can engage in all of this. And of course, we look at the role of youth not just that they are the productive force in boosting the economy, but also how they can also contribute to social development and the environmental sustainabilities and so on. So yes, again, that the role of youth can be in many aspects in the implementations of the SDG, not just from the economic side, but also many other social issues and environmental issues that it can be an active players, and that's have been highlighted in some of our highest level documents which have been adopted and noted by our leaders.
Certainly, that's one of the areas that we can all look forward to in participating the youth power into realizing the achievement of the SDGs. And early on, we heard from Her Excellency Kun Usana from the MFA, the Royal Kingdom of Thailand, about the Complementarity Initiative. So the next question is to Kun Usana, which is looking at the structure of the ASEAN COVID-19 Fund and how it is being implemented. Kun Usana, krab.
Thank you, Kun Warin. On the ASEAN COVID-19 Response Fund, you may recall that back in April, the ASEAN leaders convened a special summit in response to COVID-19. And back to back with that special ASEAN summit, we also convened a summit with our 3 key partners in East Asia, which is the ASEAN +3 summit with the RK, China, and Japan. So from that special summit, there emerged an idea of having a set of funds pulling from the existing resources within ASEAN, because normally ASEAN have our own ASEAN Development Fund, whereas our dialogue partners, be they China, Japan, the Republic of Korea, all within the ASEAN +3 framework, they also have ASEAN Cooperation Fund with all these dialogue partners. And the idea was to pool resources from all those existing funds, which normally we use in organizing projects such as exchange of youth, exchange of medias, cultural exchanges. But because of COVID-19, because of the disruption and people cannot travel, it will be more useful to pool resources from those funds and set up a special fund so that ASEAN member states can utilize that money to purchase PPE, medical supplies, test kits, medicines, to enhance our capacity in responding to COVID-19. So Thailand proposed the idea or the concept of setting up the ASEAN COVID-19 Response Fund. And the ASEAN Secretariat has now established a fund. There will be the one who administer this fund. We have already transferred resources from the ASEAN Development Fund, about $300,000. Thailand, on our part, has also contributed another $100,000. Our partners, for example, Japan, the RK, the UK, have also pledged to provide voluntary contribution to the fund as well. So we hope that this fund will be utilized to purchase essential medical supplies, and perhaps the fund can help sponsor research and development of vaccine and medicine. This will help enhance regional resilience for future public health emergency. And we are waiting for our health sector to come up with concrete projects to utilize money from the fund. And I think this will enhance the overall capacity of ASEAN in responding to COVID-19. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency Kun Usana. That's really encouraging to hear how we can quickly adjust and adapt to the emergency and the unforeseen situation. Now, let's hear it from Mr. Zahedi. We have a question for Mr. Kovite Zahedi as well, the Deputy Executive Secretary at the UNSCAP. The question for Mr. Zahedi is, which area of cooperation or which SDGs is the most successful in Asia Pacific, and what are the secrets of these success?
Yeah, that's a difficult question, but Kunwarin, let me have a go. So, if you think back to the slide that I showed on SDG progress, it showed that essentially in ASEAN we're on track to achieve one of the Sustainable Development Goals, and that's on education, SDG 4, quality education. Of course, progress on SDGs or progress in sustainable development is not linear, right? We don't expect a certain percentage every single year that will then lead us to 2030 success. There is a takeoff point, and you have to accelerate progress across many of the other SDGs. But if you look at education, what is the secret, as you called it? The secret is very obvious. It's investment. If you invest, then you get returns. And I think that's been laid bare by the COVID pandemic. What we have seen, for example, here in Thailand, is that decades of investment in the healthcare system are paying dividends. What we have seen in other countries across our region is investments in ICT and connectivity are now paying dividends. So I think we can't get away from the fact that we have to invest in what matters. And that basically means we have to invest in tackling inequality, especially through much more broad-based social protection, universal healthcare systems. Still, our region of Asia Pacific underinvests in social protection. We spend something like 3 to 4% of GDP, whereas the global average is over 10%, and the OECD average over 20%. So we need to increase the investment in social protection and in tackling essentially inequality. We also need to redirect investments towards decarbonization, an immediate move away from coal to begin with and other fossil fuels, and the removal of fossil fuel subsidies. So that is in a way misdirected investment. And if that investment, instead of fossil fuel subsidies, would go into social protection, into universal healthcare, into building a robust ICT system that reaches everybody, then you begin to really turn things around in terms of a momentum towards the SDGs. And of course, we have to deal with building resilience. We are living in a vulnerable region. We know that the countries of this region face climate-induced disasters on an annual basis. And that resilience is going to be vital so that communities and people are not really pulled back into poverty after each event. Of course, this event, COVID, has been exceptional, but as DSG Kwok said, it may not be the last time we see a pandemic. So building that resilience, investing in building that resilience is going to be vital. And I think really the success, the ingredient of success is as simple as that.
Thank you, Mr. Zahedi. At the end of the day, money talks. We need a good investment and the right investment as well. And that's a nice bridge to our next question from the business sector as well. How do we make sure that these investments yields a great return as well? And also, Kun Tongchai, we would love to hear from your perspective as well. At the regional level, such as ASEAN, how do you see business sector act and collaborate to push forward the sustainability agenda?
Right. I think this is a very important question because the environmental issue is not limited to one single country, right? It's for the globe altogether. And also we have seen in the recent past that even social issue in a country can be contagious and can become regional. So I think it's very important for the business to work together with the public sector in order to make sure that the collaboration happens across the countries in ASEAN. And I think there could be about 3 ways that we can think about how the business sector can collaborate together. First, within the ASEAN MNCs or the companies, the large companies that invest across the ASEAN countries, and there are many of those, we can make sure that the standards that are practiced in the headquarters are actually used elsewhere in the countries that these companies go into invest. And that is pretty much going on already, but I think we can do more as the business practices in different countries in ASEAN still vary quite a bit. The second part is probably about going beyond the companies themselves, but looking through the supply chain and make sure that the whole supply chain of any operations is sustainable. And here in Thai, we call it Pi Choi Nong. So basically, when we have the large corporates going outside, export to the world, we make sure that the SME, the small enterprises that are suppliers of raw materials to these big businesses, actually have raised standards to become much more sustainable. And in this way, it will become the vaccine or the immunity for the large businesses themselves. And the third part is really thinking about having an international and regional platform for collaboration, for best practice sharings, and also for joint projects. As we can see from the scores of the sustainability at the country level, we see that each country in ASEAN has different strengths and weaknesses. So if we actually work together, both on the public sector side as well as the businesses, we can actually improve our overall performance.
Thank you, Khun Tongchai. I appreciate your thoughts and your perspective on this. And that's a wrap of the session, the Decade of Action, the way forward for ASEAN and the SDGs in the new normal. We have 10 more years to go to realize the goals of the SDGs agreed by all the world leaders back in 2015. For all the questions and all the comments that were not mentioned on this session, as I mentioned earlier, that our organizer will be compiling them and will be responding all of the questions and comments to all the participants to the thank you card. We would like to take this opportunity to appreciate our speakers and express our gratitude to all our speakers for the whole session for contributing their precious time to making this event, a webinar, a success, and also all our audience. You've been a wonderful audience. On behalf of ACSD, I'm Varin Sachadeo signing off. Sawasdee krap.
Time has now begun. Open your eyes and see the change in you and me. Now as one, living under the sun. Hear the children sing, to hope their voices bring